Bob Ross is actually known as Bob Ross, but his full name is actually Robert Norman Ross. He was born October 29th, 1942, and he passed away July 4th, 1995.
Bob Ross's TV show, The Joy of Painting, aired from 1983 to 1994.
My main guy, Bob Ross, is actually missing a finger.
As a teen, while working for his father, he cut off his left index finger. But you never noticed it because he always held his palette in his left hand while painting, so you had to look very closely to spot it. The peaceful, loving Bob Ross was actually in the military.
Bob Ross enlisted at 18 for the United States Air Force. While he was stationed in Alaska, he took his first painting class at the USO.
USO is where Bob Ross learned his famous method of painting, which is oil painting. Do you love Bob Ross's haircut? Because he didn't.
Well, he actually wanted to cut it off, but he just wanted to save money, and then he was actually gonna cut it off, but it was such a big part of his business, he just wanted to keep it. When Bob Ross was more on the poor side, he didn't cut his hair because he wanted to save money. But when he became famous and rich, he just kept his hair because it was a big part of his brand.
He actually wore a wig to maintain his frizz of his hair because when he had cancer, his hair was falling out. The Ascension art teacher, Miss Frederick, is here to talk to us about Bob Ross. Miss Frederick, do you think Bob Ross gives good advice on his show?
Well, I sure do. I think that if you want to learn simple techniques, perspective, ways to make pine trees look like pine trees, yes.
Do you like Bob Ross's style of painting, and would you teach it to your kids?
Well, I think it's valuable for beginning, but I don't teach my students that way. We talk, we brainstorm, and then sometimes I show them techniques, but I don't do, you do this like I do it. So I don't teach that way, but I see the value in his work.
In other words, you would say Bob Ross's teaching is more step-by-step, and you want your kids to do it by themselves and to come up with their own ideas, but also use technique to help with that.
Exactly.
Zach, what do you think is the strangest animal Bob Ross had on his show?
I think that a deer is pretty strange.
That is pretty strange, but I think the weirdest is probably the owl.
Another thing I wanted to talk about is how Bob Ross had an alligator in his bathtub at one point. I thought that was pretty weird.
He did love animals.
Yeah, and Henry, what is Bob Ross's most famous animal, you think?
Well, one of Bob Ross's most famous animals is two squirrels. One is named Peapod, and the other, my personal favorite, Squirrely Wirely Brown. Bob Ross really is an interesting person. I really hoped you learned something new about him on this podcast.